The first card we're going to turn over here is the Hierophant. In its upright position, it stands for tradition, conformity, morality, and ethics. If it were reversed, it would stand for rebellion, subversiveness, and new approaches. The next card, we have the Chariot, and this one is reversed. Its reverse meaning is lack of control, lack of direction, or aggression. If it were in an upright position, it would stand for direction, control, or willpower. The next card we have here is going to be the Six of Swords. In its upright position, it stands for transition, leaving behind, or moving on. If it were reversed, it would stand for emotional baggage, unresolved issues, or resisting transition. The next card I have here is the Moon. In its upright position, it stands for unconscious, illusions, or intuition. If it were reversed, it would stand for confusion, fear, or misinterpretation. Okay, the next card I have here is going to be the Ace of Cups. This is reversed, which means that it stands for emotional loss, blocked creativity, or emptiness. In its upright position, it stands for new feelings, spirituality, and intuition. And lastly, we have the Knight of Wands. In its upright position, it stands for action, adventure, fearlessness, and if it were reversed, it would stand for anger, impulsiveness, and recklessness. Now this first card, the Hierophant, features Dr. Anshu. You might recognize him from Remarkable Restoratives. It's a shop in Shanku that sells alternative medicines if you don't want to use medicines from the pharmacy to heal your Neopets when they get sick. You might also recognize him from the games room. He is the person who requests goods to be brought to him in the game Rebel Roundup. Rebel Roundup is very similar to a game you've probably played before called Yuzuki Frenzy, where you run around and you grab a bunch of items and bring them back to somebody who is requesting a specific collection of items. There have also been other versions of this game that you might have played before. There was a Diva Stars edition of this game for when Diva Stars were still around. They were marketing with Neopets to promote their dolls. And there was also a game called Super Shopping Spree, which was pretty much the same thing. It was also marketing for Cinnamon Toast Crunch cereal. Surprisingly, the Cinnamon Toast Crunch version of the game, Super Shopping Spree, is still available on Neopets.com. You could actually go play it right now if you wanted to. The next card we have here, the Chariot, features Captain Tuan and Shumi. Now, Captain Tuan is going to be a 42-year-old male Gnorbu. I'm going to specify the age and gender for Neopets that appear in the Neopedia just because it's additional context. Most characters are not going to be thoroughly fleshed out in the Neopets lore, but I will make sure to point it out whenever it does come up. You'll also recognize Captain Tuan from the user lookup shield for 11 years, if you've seen that on anyone's user profile at this point. And Shumi is his first mate, which is a green Scorchio. Now, the reason this card is reversed here is because during the plot of Cyodrakes Gaze, which is the name of the ship, there was a lot of turmoil going on. We're going to be covering that in the following card. This next card, the Six of Swords, is called the Cyodrakes Gaze, or it features the Cyodrakes Gaze. The Cyodrakes Gaze, the ship, is featured in the game Eye of the Storm. In fact, there's a couple other games I forgot to mention. It's featured in the Eye of the Storm, and it's featured in the game Cloud Raiders. Now, during the plot of the Cyodrakes Gaze, there is a incident where a member of the ship falls overboard. And then there's a suspicion that somebody was responsible for pushing them overboard. And there's a series of comics where we're interviewing the different members of the crew and trying to figure out what could have happened. In the first chapter, which is chapter 2 of the plot, we see an interview with Kentari where he explains what happened from his perspective. Chapter 3, you interview Bonju and see what his perspective of the incident was. Again, in chapter 4, you interview Linae. In chapter 5, there's an interview with Anshu. And then in chapter 6, you get to find out what actually happened. There was also a game on the 3DS and the Nintendo Wii called Neopets Puzzle Adventure, and it featured a lot of the characters on these cards. So now we're going to go through and talk about who these characters are. Starting from the top, and I'm going to go around clockwise, you have Kentari, who is a yellow male Shoiru who's 24 years old. They're part of the Neopets Puzzle Adventure, and they are also the person who runs Wondrous Weaponry, the shop. in Neopets. And they're the host of the game Godori, which is a card game in the games room. Second, you've got Linae, which in Chapter 4, you see that Linae sought out Anshu, the doctor, for a stomachache after eating Bonju's cooking. And she was kind of mean to Hoban, the person who fell overboard, telling him that he's bad luck and basically that he didn't have a place on the ship, that she didn't want him there. And she's also featured as the trophy on the game Kaojong. It's mentioned in her lore information that she's a big fan of playing Kaojong, so that's the reason you'll see her listed as the character trophy. And they're going to have Bonju, the Bloomer, who is listed as the user lookup shield for 18 years. You probably know him from Culinary Concoctions. It is a feature that was added to the game a few years ago. There's a lot of mystery around it because there's an avatar available for it with Bonju's face as the avatar. And everybody was trying to figure out for like 3 years after this avatar was released how you actually get it, because Culinary Concoctions has a recipe cooking area that looks just like the cooking pot. And people were assuming, because it was released at the same time, that you had to use Culinary Concoctions to get the avatar, but it was a red herring all along. You actually have to cook a specific meal at the cooking pot in order to get the avatar during the month of August. Bonju was actually the one who was guilty of pushing Hoban overboard because Hoban insulted his cooking. You get to see a little bit about that in Chapter 3. Next to him, you're going to see Orin, which is a red Nemo. Orin was actually stuck in the ship's hold during the events of Cyodrakes gaze. The only part of the plot they really participated in was telling you that they heard somebody fall overboard. You might also recognize Orin from being the shopkeeper of exotic foods, and he's also the character in the game Rebel Roundup that I just mentioned earlier. He's actually the playable character that is fetching items for Anshu. Of course, I've already gone over Captain Tuan, so lastly we're going to have Hoban, which is a 30-year-old yellow male Aisha. One of the key things that he's known for during the plot was the captain was angry at him and everybody was making fun of him and teasing him during a dinner. And he said, yeah, well, let's see you laugh while I sail you into a storm. And that is a phrase that came up over and over during the plot. It was kind of ironic that he wound up being the one to fall overboard. And then at the end of the Cyodrakes gaze plot, he actually explained what happened and basically told everybody that Bonju was responsible for being a jerk. The next card we're going to have is going to feature the wise Old Gnorbu. Now, the wise Old Gnorbu has a pupil named Clara, who is not featured on the card, and you probably recognize him from the Lunar Temple. It's a feature in the game most people do every day, where there is a picture of the sun, Neopia, and a moon, and you have to figure out what the phase of the moon would be based on the position, and it's randomly generated every day for every user. He's also featured in the user lookup shield for having an 8-year-old account, and he introduces us to the plot of the Atlas of the Ancients. At the beginning of the Atlas of the Ancients, he summons Roxton to figure out the meaning of the stars with the aid of his pupil Clara. There's also Roxton's assistant Geordie. Geordie you might recognize from, if you use Jelly Neo, there's a game like Wordle called Jordle, who's not featured on the card, and they borrow a flying ship, which happens to be known as a Cyodrakes gaze. The trio, which is Roxton, Clara, and Geordie, make their way on the Cyodrakes gaze and wind up hitting a turbulent storm where they have to pull off into a cave to wait out the storm, and they discover a cave painting depicting a strange Neopet that appears to be made out of fire. When they leave there, they first travel to Altidor's Hall of Heroes and they find a pocket watch among the statues. They leave there, and en route to Fairyland, their next stop, they encounter another storm where Geordie is struck by lightning, and then they proceed to the healing springs where they encounter the person on our next card, which is Marina, the water fairy. Now, you most likely know Marina for being the shopkeeper at the healing springs and being the fairy that will heal your pets every 30 minutes. Well, during the plot, she got into an argument with Roxton because of a history that they had together, and Roxton was just trying to get in there, take care of Geordie, and get out, but he also wanted to steal a pump from the healing springs that he noticed. So the Gnorbu's pupil Clara sees an opportunity and she throws a slushie at Marina, the water fairy. And then while Marina is trying to compose herself, she grabs and steals the water pump and hightails it out of there. And then the group then moves on to Terror Mountain. On their way to Terror Mountain, they're attacked by pirates and Roxton managed to pilot them away safely. That's where the game Cloud Racers comes from. And it was actually required during the plot to have a certain score in the game Cloud Racers in order to advance the plot. Now, when they got there, they noticed that there was a lot of ice melting, and there was a brass horn within the melting ice. And they grabbed it just in time to flee from an avalanche. And then there was a game called Let It Slide. Nope. Let me correct myself here. Escaping the Avalanche actually wound up becoming its own game called Clara on Ice, which is the exact same as the game Let It Slide, but it was temporarily released as part of the plot. It's not available on the site anymore, but if you're interested on seeing what Clara on Ice is like, you can play Let It Slide. Again, much like with Cloud Racers, you had to achieve a certain score in order for you to receive the item for you as a player to be able to advance the plot. Once they had visited these 4 different spots, Clara was looking because she had studied the lunar charts as well, and she couldn't figure out where to go next. And then Roxton looked at the map with her, and he was like, "Oh, hey, look, the 4 different places that we've been to form an X on the map. So we're going to just go ahead and use the X marks the spot method and head to the middle of the ocean." And he wound up being right. They found a volcano in the middle of the ocean. And then as they were exploring the island, they traveled into a cave in the volcano, and there was a deep drop like into the heart of the volcano where they parachuted down into like this giant abyss. And they released, again, a game to go along with it called Cave Glider. This one does still work on Neopets.com, but I found that you can only play it with your quality settings set to low. That might just be an issue that I'm having on my computer. But I was actually playing with Whitefish Gaming the other day, and he was trying to get the game to play, but for some reason, I'm assuming that it is not a specific user's issue. I think it is just the game itself requires you to play it on low quality in order to play for some reason. When they got to the bottom, they encountered a Shoiru, a very cool Shoiru, mind you, named Cog. Now, I'm sure y'all remember Cog. If you play Neopets, you know Cog, because every time TNT releases a cool new outfit on a Pets Day, almost always there is clothing items released only at Cog's Togs shop. Now, they gave them all the different items that they gathered from the different places they had been. The brass horn, the pump, and what's the word for it? The pocket watch. And Cog smashes these pieces together to reassemble a machine that is going to fix the molten core of Neopia in order to prevent a climate disaster, basically. Again, there was a game released for this part of the series called Clockwork Codebreaker. Another game that was released that no longer works on the website. It just happens to be identical to the game Time Tunnel. So if you're interested in seeing what it was like, you could always play Time Tunnel. Once you got a high enough score in the game, you received an item that was part of the plot you needed to unlock to advance once again. And then one of the last steps, the second to last step in the plot, they had to travel deeper into the cave to ask the lost Molterans for help. And then there was a game released for that called Moltera Run, which is one of the only Atlas of the Ancients games that you can still play regularly without having to do anything funny. It's also the exact same game, or pretty much the exact same game as Volcano Run 2. And once they got to the end, they met the Molterians, which is how magma pets were released. And if you finish the entire plot, you actually gained the ability to dip a pet at the magma pool whenever you want to, instead of having to figure out what your magma pool time is. So that was one of the perks of being around during the plot. And then our last card is going to be Roxton A Colchester III, who is going to be a 24-year-old male Lutari, and he is listed as the user lookup shield for a 10-and-a-half-year-old account. And you might think that since I just told you the entire plot of the Moltera plot, you might think that might be all that I have to say about Roxton, but there is more. Not only was he a major character in Atlas of the Ancients. Oh, shoot. I just realized I forgot to mention the reason that the Ace of Cups Marina was reversed was because during the plot, Atlas of the Ancients, I felt that emotional loss, blocked creativity, and emptiness was more appropriate than new feelings and spirituality. She was kind of an antagonist during the plot, at least towards the characters that we're following. She's usually a pretty nice gal. All right, so moving on, we have our Knight of Wands, Roxton A Colchester III. The next thing that Roxton was featured in was the Journey to the Lost Isle, where Professor Hugo Fairweather was doing research, and he believed that he had uncovered the location of the Lost Isle after reading the journal of Mad Tongue Murphy. Now, Roxton was the only person in the room during this lecture who wasn't laughing at Professor Fairweather, and he agreed to take on the challenge. During this plot, he is joined by Lillian Fairweather, who is the daughter of Professor, and Werther, who is the professor's assistant. Werther's also a part of the Return of Dr. Sloth plot, and he's likely part of the Resistance, but that's going to be covered in a later video. Also in this plot is Captain Jethro Rourke, who is a very cool Ogryn. I would argue that all Ogryns are very cool, but Jethro is especially cool. He happens to be the captain of the SS Primella during the plot, and he appears during the Faerie Ruins plot, which I also will not be covering in this video. The Return of Dr. Sloth and the Faerie's Ruin are going to be nearly dedicated videos of their own. I'm trying to limit the number of plots that I'm talking about per video. And the last character featured in the plot who is noteworthy is Scrap. Scrap was a stowaway who was trying to get away from... I don't even recall if they named the place where the plot began. But he was trying to get away, and he was caught stowing away. Hence, one of the parts of the plot was to play a game called Stowaway Sting. This game is actually still alive and well on the site, and I would say it's kind of fun. I actually played it a few days ago and managed to snag a trophy for it. Scrap also had a lot of side missions during the plot. There were puzzles that you had to participate in while on the ship as it was traveling to the Lost Isle in order for your player account, in order for your player account to be able to progress. And this ship, once again, very surprisingly, nobody saw this coming, it sailed into a storm. And the storm wound up lasting 3 days, and they got marooned after crashing onto a rocky part of an island. And it just coincidentally happened to be the Lost Island that they were looking for. The 3 explorers, which were Lillian, the Professor, and Roxton, make their way out into the island, much to the dismay of Captain Rourke, because the ship was completely destroyed. And he's like, hey, we're never getting home if we can't reassemble the ship now, because, the tide is leaving out and bits and pieces of the ship are going to float away. But Roxton and the Fairweathers are like, nah, we're good. We're just gonna, go explore this island. And hopefully we get back just in time for you to be done rebuilding the ship. Luckily, the captain did have Scrap. He had Scrap to help him out. And that was another thing that you had to participate in as part of the plot. There were some little mini games where you helped reassemble the ship. And then you're also at the same time following the explorers, and they discover an ancient structure in the middle of the jungle. Also, I'm adding this in post. Sorry if my voice is a little different. There was also a battle dome portion of this plot and a puzzle in order to get this mysterious building in the middle of the jungle, which had a bunch of scientific drawings of pets, or P3s as we like to call them. They discovered just a little too late that they'd stumbled onto a giant moach nest, which is terrifying. And there was a puzzle game involved which let the player run around the forest and collect items like a giant jawbone and a stick. I think it's technically still possible to collect the items using URLs, but you can't really participate in the plot anymore. The pages are all blacked out. And as always, there were rewards for participating in the event. I'm sure we'll be seeing more of Roxton and a few of the characters in the future. And on a personal note, I've really been enjoying learning about these old plots. I really wish there was a way we could re-experience them and, get the trophies for having participated in the part of Neopets history and lore firsthand. It seems like Neopets has a policy that what's in the past should stay in the past. I was reading through the New European Times, and there was a question asked that said, "Hey guys, happy Valentine's Day. When it comes, of course, so on and so forth." They brought up that, hey, I missed everything but the obelisk in the spooky food contest. New players could thrill in the adventures as well as some of us poor working stiffs who just don't have the time back then. How about it? Would you be interested in bringing back old plots? And then the Neopets team answered, one-time events are just that. It's part of the open history, and while it can be read about in guides, it isn't intended to be experienced again. Moving forward, there will be new content for players who have joined us more recently or didn't participate in previous events for one reason or another. Unless someone invents a time machine, then you can go back. Though you'd more likely spend time placing sporting bets than playing old Neopets plots. It's okay, we understand. Which, okay, fine. I get that. I get the sentiment that if you weren't there, you missed out, because you can't really discover Molterra after the fact, or Maraqua. But I think it misses a lot of the point of Neopets. It's more about the experience in discovering little treasures around the site. The Altador plot is possibly my favorite thing I've done since coming back. Reading up on the old plots is coming close to being my second favorite thing. I actually wound up staying up all night doing it as soon as I discovered I could still participate in the Altador plot. And I didn't feel like I was detached from the Neopets community by having done it way after everybody else did. Because the plot was good enough to stand on its own. Also, highly recommend checking out Rini Lennox's video on doing the Altador plot. It's so much fun to watch somebody else experiencing it. Just after I got to do it myself, I think it's a really cool thing that you get to experience part of Neopets history and you can get a trophy for it.